Martinique Lewis, diversity and travel consultant, travel content creator, and Black travel enthusiast.
As the saying goes, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. So where have we been? Well, all over. But the story of how Black people travel in America runs deep. That's why I'm so excited to take you with me on a trip to some of the most historic and iconic cities that shaped Black culture as we know it. These are the spaces and places that connected and strengthened the Black community. The places that supported some of the biggest names and icons of those times. Carry your green book with you. You may need it was the motto. The Negro Motorist Green Book helped keep African Americans safe when traveling during the Jim Crow era.
This book told you about hotels, restaurants, barbershops, and so many other things that you needed as an African American when traveling from state to state.
So come along with me as I experience these green routes of travel across America. Travel today looks a lot different than it did 80 years ago. And it probably looks most different for the Black travelers in America. Our mobility has been policed since before the creation of automobiles. So we are keenly aware that freedom of travel hasn't come to us so freely. But like most things in our lives, we made a way out of no way. And from the fights of the ancestors before us, we are reaping the fruits of their labor today. Oh, it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Since the rise of the Black travel movement, African Americans spend $109.6 billion annually on travel. That's no chump change. I want to retrace the roots of travel in this country to get a true feel of the history they left for us to discover. And one thing about Black travelers during those times is, baby, they were gonna dress from head to toe. And that's exactly what you'll see me doing when traveling from place to place, paying homage to Black designers everywhere. I'm starting my cross-country trek in New York City, and you can't travel to NYC without coming to Harlem, the place where it all started. And the place where Victor and Alma Green's Negro Motorist Green Book was realized. Victor Hugo Green, a postal worker, used a grassroots method to get his travel guide into circulation. Tapping his fellow mailmen to help reach a broader public, he also distributed via mail order, Black businesses, and media campaigns with the help of Esso gas station, known as ExxonMobil today. His partnership with Esso allowed him to distribute the Green Book at various gas stations, making it front and center for a key audience. Talk about genius marketing. A constant in the Green Book was the Harlem YMCA, the heart of New York City. And if the Y is the heart, then the woman I'm about to meet is one of the vessels helping to keep its story alive. Renowned author and scholar, Dr. Gretchen Soren.
Long before I was born, my parents had moved from North Carolina to New Jersey as part of the Great Migration. And every summer, we traveled back to North Carolina to visit my grandmother. And that really got me started when a colleague of mine handed me a Green Book and said, "Have you ever seen this?" And I had never seen it.
Right.
Even though I didn't know anything about it, it seemed to be my own story. It seemed to be about my own story. And that's how I wanted to figure out what this was about for African Americans.
Costing 25 cents, the first edition of this 15-page travel guide focused on New York City businesses that welcomed African American customers.
An ultra-modern pleasure highway, another great new advance in travel in the nationwide program.
State by state, this guide helped travelers maneuver with dignity and less fear.
Our parents didn't talk about it. They didn't want to scare us. They didn't want us to really know how dangerous it was to go out on the road. And so they didn't talk about it. But there were lots of things that were peculiar about the travel that we did in the late 50s and the 60s. And we used to get up and we would drive at night. We would drive in the dark. And I found out that that's what other families were doing. You travel in the dark because it's less likely that you're going to get stopped by the police. They're less likely to be able to see in the car. And then we would always carry all of our food. And, we'd say, we'd like to stop at a hotel or let's stop at a restaurant. No, we're going to carry our food in the car and we're going to stop by the side of the road and eat. Those were things that African Americans devised to keep themselves safe. Black people wanted to travel just like other Americans. They wanted to see the country. They wanted to educate their children. They wanted to see the national parks. They wanted to see the sights.
I love how in your book you go through the importance of the automobile to the African American family. People didn't necessarily want us on the trains with them, and they didn't want us on the bus with them. The importance of the automobile is where our story starts.
If you had to take the segregated bus or you had to take the segregated train, you would do everything you could to keep away from that humiliation. And it was humiliation, right? People would yell at you. You had to sit in the back of the bus. You had to sit on the dirty train car, the Negro car. You didn't want to do that. And you certainly didn't want that for your children. But if you could get some money together and get an automobile, Henry Ford ironically makes that possible, right? Because of mass production, automobiles are much less expensive. And you can buy a car and you can take your family privately without humiliation in your very own personal, independent space. And that made a huge difference for families.
A huge difference indeed. And where did many of those families go? Just like today, New York City. In the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance took shape and attracted travelers from near and far, rolling right up to the birthplace of the Negro motorist Green Book.
So Harlem is really Victor Green's and Alma Green's base. They are on Lenox Avenue.
Yeah.
They're right at the heart of Harlem.
Right.
Harlem was originally a white community that becomes blacker and blacker as African Americans get pushed further and further north. And in the 1920s, you have African Americans from all over the country, artists, writers, moving to Harlem. And you have this incredible flowering of Black culture.
Right.
You have clubs, you have music, you have art, you have poetry.
Right.
You have culture. It's really a mecca for Black people. I counted one time there were 144 sites in the Green Book.
Wow.
In New York.
Harlem today covers many city blocks and has over 60 Black-owned businesses. Everything from restaurants and cafes to bars and unique shops. Once a predominantly Jewish and Italian borough, Harlem began to shift to a more Black and Puerto Rican population during the Great Migration of the early 20th century. This was a time when African Americans sought social and economic equality, laying the foundation for future success. The era, known as the Harlem Renaissance, was a golden age of African American culture in the United States. And today, I'm walking down one of the most iconic blocks where these Black artists and literary giants would meet, hang out, and cultivate the image. The history of this block may be unknown to some, but was palpable for Justine and Juliet Masters, who fell in love with this location 9 years ago.
When we were about to sign the lease for the building, we Googled 580 St. Nicholas, and it showed Regina Anderson Andrews, who worked as a librarian on 135th Street at the Schomburg Library. And it showed her and her friends on the roof of the building, like, you know, partying, having a good time. Her friends are Langston Hughes.
Wow.
Zora Neale Hurston.
Wow.
Du Bois, you know, Charles Johnson, like heavy hitters in the creative circle of the Renaissance.
The Caribbean British fusion restaurant, The Edge, opened its doors on the historic block 8 years ago, and what a historic block it is.
So in June of 2021, the Dorrance Brooks Square was given historical landmark status. Dorrance Brooks was a soldier, one of the first black soldiers fighting in World War I, I believe. And his regiment was the Harlem Hellfighters. So his building that he lived in is 2 blocks down that way. Wow. And it's well-deserved because all these buildings along Edgecomb Avenue are from the era of the early Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah.
So they definitely have that vibration. So yeah, it's beautiful.
It's all about the vibes. And with the rich history continuing to be written here every day, the new vibes are sure to arise. Harlem is a mecca for African-American culture and experiences. And on this historic block, Juliet and Justine Masters are making sure you can taste it. So when people typically come into the Edge, what can they expect when they step foot here?
They can expect great service, great food, and a good vibe.
We hear that often. Everyone's like, oh, I like the vibe in here. And then, you know.
And our food is really good.
Our food is very good.
I'm getting a little hungry. Can I go try some of the things on the menu?
Absolutely. Let's go.
I fed my soul with the rich history of this area, and now my stomach with this bomb meal. My taste buds are thoroughly satisfied.
This, in real life, it's delicious.
Even though times change and history is often forgotten, I'm happy to see places like The Edge revive and pay homage to that history and build on its foundation. Food, culture, and lodging have always been staples of the travel experience. But if I was perusing these streets 80 years ago, my hotel choices would have been limited. Which brings me back to the YMCA.
So many people like Martin Luther King came through here. What was the overall goal for the Young Men's Christian Association, or how we all know it, the YMCA?
The Ys were there for physical and emotional and spiritual uplift. And sadly, there were colored Ys and there were white Ys. So if you think about travelers, black travelers, they needed places to stay. And even in New York, there was segregation.
Right.
You couldn't stay at the hotels downtown. And so the YMCA provided that haven, that safe haven, where you could find a room and a place to stay overnight.
And right now, we're sitting in the mural room that now serves as a room to help some of the kids who live in the local neighborhood. But this mural is so important. And can you talk about what the mural means and why it is important?
Well, Aaron Douglas is an incredibly important artist in the Harlem Renaissance. And his mural represents aspects of African-American life. And you can see the banjo, an important instrument brought by slaves to this country. You can see enslaved people. You can see dancing. You can see music. And you can see a slave cabin at the center.
Right.
It does need a little bit of conservation, but it's absolutely beautiful.
If not for scholars like Dr. Soren or extraordinary figures like Victor and Alma Green, all of this history could very well be a history forgotten.
Victor Green made a difference. Alma Green made a difference. And children should know that they can make a difference too, and that it's their responsibility to continue to push this country forward and to change it.
I hate to say goodbye to New York, but my journey through the Green Book beckons. When Victor and Alma created the Green Book in 1936, moving about our great country with ease was difficult for people who looked like me. During this time, restrictive laws, known as the Jim Crow laws, were enacted. These laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. And though these laws are more commonly associated with the South, a majority of the states in the Union enforce segregation, either legally or by mob rule. So, African-American travelers may have found freedom with the automobile, but that freedom needed to be carefully planned out because there was danger. A danger known as Sundown Towns. Sundown Towns meant Black travelers had to be out by sundown. These towns were deliberately designed to encompass a majority white population, intentionally excluding African-American citizens and other people of color. These were some of the scariest places for African-American travelers, and they didn't always know if they were driving through a sundown town or whether or not they were welcome at all. This is part of the reason the Green Book was created. But as daunting as it was, Black travelers were not deterred. With the Green Book in hand, they pressed on to visit loved ones, seek opportunity, and, not least, to enjoy blissful experiences. Traveling with my own Green Book in hand, I've just arrived in a city known for its barbecue, iconic jazz scene, and the place credited as the home of Negro League baseball, Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City has a unique vibrancy and charm, and it's steeped in the history of people who look like me. It's the same history that was being written in the early 20th century that drew people here then and has brought me back today. And one of these areas that captures the lush history is 18th and Vine, a nationally recognized historic African-American district. Eventually morphing into a city within a city, 18th and Vine became a landing spot for many African-American migrants during the Great Migration. It was a place that African-Americans built from the ground up and called home. And if there's one thing that makes this place so special to me, it's the fact that in 1920, Kansas City gave birth to the Negro Leagues. When 8 independent Black baseball teams met in the Paseo YMCA at a time when 2 things were on the rise: baseball and segregation.
So I'm here at one of the most important places in American baseball history, the Negro League Baseball Museum, to talk to one of the most knowledgeable people you'll ever meet, Mr. Bob Kendrick. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. How did this museum go from one room to this 10,000 square feet?
It really is an amazing story that in its own respect mimics the rise of the Negro Leagues.
The sound of a ball meeting a bat.
No one thought that the Negro Leagues would ever succeed.
It's a sport that appeals to all ages, to all groups.
And not only did it succeed, it would operate for 40 years, and it literally changed the game and our country. And here comes this little fledgling museum in 1990 known as the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, born in a little tiny one-room office right across the street from where we operate inside the Lincoln Building, where it was situated in that little one office, had a conference room table, and guys like the museum's founder, Buck O'Neill, and other local Negro Leaguers who were still with us at that time.
Yeah.
You know, it's sad to say that they've all passed on.
Yeah.
But they literally took turns paying the monthly rent.
Yep.
To keep that little office open, and with it, our hopes and dreams of one day building a facility that would pay rightful tribute to not only one of the greatest chapters in baseball history, but what now thousands of people from around the world learn, one of the greatest chapters in American history.
I love that. So the Negro Motorist Green Book was created between the 30s and the 60s, around the same time as the Negro Baseball Leagues. How important was it for them to be able to have a resource like that?
Oh, vitally important, because you're looking for safe havens, sanctuaries that would offer you those basic services that you couldn't get. And then when you delve a little deeper into the story of the Negro Leagues, we kind of learn that the Negro Leagues were such a tremendous catalyst for those black businesses' success, those segregated, mandated black-owned businesses, which emerged to meet the needs that weren't being fulfilled because we couldn't patronize those white establishments. And here was Negro Leagues Baseball bringing those businesses a built-in clientele. So while the circumstances were not ideal, they had a resolve that ultimately helped create something that was so special, something that was inherently ours.
That same spirit is alive and healthy today all over the city. Black-owned spaces have a knack for preserving our past while nurturing the future.
So you brought her in.
Case in point, Ruby Jean's Juicery, which combines nutritious food with family roots, and is named after the grandmother of founder and Kansas City native, Chris Good.
Ruby Jean's, it really started about 10 blocks or so that way.
Okay.
My grandmother, she was a really, really pivotal person in my life. The woman of few words, but you know, when black grandma speaks, you listen.
You better listen.
My grandma came from Vian, Oklahoma, a little bitty dot on the map. You look too fast, you'll miss it. But she brought from Vian to Kansas City this love of soul food cooking, and the part that really kind of set it off course was that soul food is not it's not this lifestyle that you should live day in and day out, and that's the only way she knew to cook. That's the only way she knew to provide for her family. Unfortunately, when my grandmother was 61 years old, I was a 14-year-old kid. She got really sick really fast with type 2 diabetes. She didn't really believe in healthcare, and unfortunately that cost her dearly, and us as well. And so I carried that through life, you know, wanting to show people like, man, my grandmothers were amazing. Fast forward, God gave me that ability through Ruby Jean's Juicery.
And I love right here on your wall, it says health is freedom. And that's so important when we're speaking about black communities, because we know historically our communities are food deserts. But then there's a Chris Good who's from Kansas City and who says, I'm gonna open up this juicery in honor of my grandmother, literally in a food desert.
This is the first ever healthy business on the entire east side of Kansas City, in the history of this city.
In the entire east side of Kansas City.
When it first came to me, I questioned it. I said, I know this place. 30th and Truce, like, will this work? And so when I grappled with that and I rested on the idea, I said, you know what? I gotta do this.
Yeah.
Because if I don't do this, it may not ever happen.
And sometimes all it takes is the courage of one to change the course of history, much like Victor Green and his wife Alma did with the Negro Motorist Green Book. The Green Book is a testament to the kind of America ordinary black travelers moved through not so long ago. And you'd want to believe that the biggest superstars and ball players of that time fared better, but they suffered the same injustices.
Come spring, and the old refrain, "Take me out to the ball game," echoes across America from the western.
Baseball, America's favorite pastime. Some of the best men to ever play the game were African American. They entertained the masses but struggled to be seen as equals by the white fans.
You have players who are arguably the best baseball players, who people would come from far and wide, whether they're white or black, to see them play. And while they were traveling to these places, they couldn't eat in a restaurant. They didn't have anywhere to stay.
And really, their challenges were, for the most part, traveling the highways and byways of this country. The baseball field was, in essence, their sanctuary.
Yep.
That's where they got a chance to do what they do, to put on a show. And those fans would ride into a town, fill up the ballpark, and yet not be able to get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered them.
Exactly.
Or not have a place to stay, so they would indeed sleep on the bus and eat their peanut butter and crackers until they could get to a place that would offer them basic services. It would have been easy for them to quit, to say, to hell with this, you know, because it wasn't as if they were making a boatload of money. They were making a decent living playing the game they loved. The circumstances that dictated a need for Negro Leagues are sorrowful, but not the Negro Leagues themselves. The Negro Leagues themselves are triumph over that adversity, and we need that story. I don't want the only side that you see of me to be is the downtrodden side of my experiences. You need to see my success stories, because very few folks can relate to that downtrodden side of my journey seeking equality in this country. But you can relate to my success story. And so if you only see my struggles, then you never see the real me. And I think through the lens of these courageous athletes, they didn't know that they were making history. They didn't care about making history. They just wanted to play ball. But the pride, the passion, the perseverance, the determination, the courage that they demonstrated in the face of adversity would not only change this game, but more importantly, it would change our country.
You see, resilience and perseverance are in the DNA of the Black experience in America. When obstacles are put in our way, we figure out how to come out on the other side of achieving new heights.
We know that this is historically the Black neighborhood. It's the east side of Truce, which, if anybody knows anything about Truce, west side is more white, east side is more Black. And in our neighborhoods, the mascots you see is a white man on KFC, a girl with red hair on Wendy's, but then you got this Black woman, right? You have this Black woman who's beautiful with gold earrings, red lipstick, and that's what the babies are seeing when they're, how does that make you feel?
You know, it's humbling. I'm grateful that God gave me the foresight to be able to see it, to not only have the opportunity to honor my grandmother and my family, but to honor all the other families out there that exist. The beauty about my grandmother is that her story is a universal story. There's a Ruby Jean in your family. There's a Ruby Jean in every single family unit represented. We have this ability to tell a very Black story that touches every walk of life. When these doors are open, it's not just Black people coming in here. It's not just white people coming in here. There are no boundaries for the people that come here.
I love the vibe.
And so that's the thing that we've been able to create here, is create truth and reality and rawness and realness through our lens, and just sharing our story. Come in here, feel like you at grandma's house, get a hug, get a smile, and feel this vibe, because we all need it.
And just like that, my time in Kansas City, Missouri is done. The one word to describe my experience in Kansas City as a whole is full. Full with good eats, full with a richer knowledge of history, and full of gratitude. Next up, I traveled to Denver, Colorado, or as some may know it, the Harlem of the West, to get a lay of the land on its historic 5 Points district and what made it such a magnet for Black travelers back then, and the businesses that are hoping to return it to its former glory. Guided by the Negro Motorist Green Book, I've traveled hundreds of miles west and 1 mile high. Denver, Colorado is home to the 5 Points District, which in 2002 received a well-deserved historical landmark status and still bears some signs of the flourishing African-American community that lived here. 5 Points was the heart of African-American commerce during the days of segregation. And of all of my travels, this place is the nearest and dearest to my heart because of my family connection to it. My family includes the Butlers, who migrated from Maryland to Denver, where they met the Hoopers. And through a special union, my grandfather was born. The man in this mural is my grandfather's uncle, Benny Hooper, a successful businessman and the unofficial mayor of 5 Points, who poured his time, energy, and resources into this once historically African-American neighborhood. My great-uncle was one of the many African Americans who helped quell the myth that the Wild West was inhabited by an entirely white population. And not only were the businesses singing a glorious tune, but so were the many iconic musicians who ushered in the Denver jazz scene, helping the 5 Points neighborhood earn a very fitting nickname. I was lucky enough to catch professor and author Dr. Ronald Stevens to fill us in on details of how 5 Points eventually became the Harlem of the West.
Talk about migration of African Americans to Denver. Why Denver was so desirable for African Americans to come here.
After the Civil War and during Reconstruction, what a lot of people don't understand was there was a growing black middle class. That's when it was first emerging. And of course, the first voluntary migration of African Americans was in 1877 to Nicodemus, Kansas. The Exodusters. I don't know if you've ever been to Kansas, but it's almost like right in the middle of Kansas, you know, it's burning hot. They got here, they were promised that, you know, they'd be able to build a community, in which they did, a church, schoolhouse, several homes. But there was a problem with water, and so some families left Nicodemus and they continued west, and some landed in Denver. Denver was founded in 1858, I believe. Right, and so as Denver was being founded, African Americans are migrating slowly, and the numbers start to grow by 1900. So you think about, you know, the entertainers, but you also had black middle class, because the middle class could afford to travel. And many of them, previous to this, were traveling by rail first. But by 1929, you got African Americans who have automobiles, especially the entertainers and the musicians, and they will get on the road. So between Kansas City, Missouri, and Los Angeles, right, Denver was the major hub for African-American music, jazz in particular.
And that's why it's called the Harlem of the West.
Harlem of the West, absolutely.
And that was basically because of the huge jazz scene that was here.
The huge jazz scene, and so you had the musicians coming, you had African Americans, middle class, that lived here in Denver, but you also had African Americans traveling to Denver to see these shows. And this is all happening just as Victor Green publishes the Green Book, which was an idea that he had pulled from the Jewish community. The Jewish community was using that for the Catskills. In New York, they were using that like in the late part of the 19th century.
Yeah.
Well, he got the idea, being a postal worker, right, from that. The African Americans are a resilient people. A lot of that history is hidden, right? A lot of that history is ignored. But you have a growing population of African American historians, sociologists, professors that are doing research that want to rescue Black history, which is American history.
Yes. Wait, say that again. Black history
is
American history. And without Black history, we can't talk about American history.
Well, even American music, right? The roots of American music is Black music, right? From spirituals to the blues to jazz,
to rock and roll.
All the way to hip hop.
But we digress. Back to 5 Points. I know Dr. Stevens has a story or two that might be missing from your average history book.
Back in the 1920s, there was a Joseph Westbrook, a light-skinned African-American who could pass as white. So 1920s, there was a large Ku Klux Klan here in Colorado. It was second to the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana. Westbrook was able to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan that had planned harm on the 5 Points community. So he was able to warn the Black businesses because it was thriving in 5 Points.
It's like they say, success breeds enemies, especially for thriving Black communities in the 1920s. But success also breeds success. 100 years later, 5 Points is still here, from longtime community staples to the new kids on the block.
Hi, Miss Risa. Miss Marty. It's so good to see you.
The 5 Points District in Denver, Colorado has a legacy of African-American excellence. Longtime business owners like Franklin and Maydella Steiger take pride in carrying that torch forward as the neighborhood changes.
Frank and Miss May, thank you so much for allowing me to come in here today. When people talk about 5 Points, they always say, you have to come see the Steigers. And they've been loving you guys for the past 40 years, correct?
I've been here for 40 or better.
Uh-huh.
And I serve the people well.
And so, over the past 40 years, how many people from the community did you employ here at the barbershop?
About 3 off and on, you know. And during my time, you had the natural and the Jerry curl.
Uh-huh.
And that's what brought the money in.
Okay. Miss May, you had a Jerry curl?
Yes.
Did you have a Jerry curl?
And an afro.
I was a natural.
Okay, that was your natural.
But then, too, for the community, and with the projects being over on the Arapahoe, the little kids would come in and say, Mr. Steiger, can I sweep the floor? Can I do this, for lunch money? And he used to always have 1 or 2 of them, come and help clean up the shop and give them money. And they would take that money, and that was their school lunch money for the week.
Yeah.
One of the kids turned out to be a doctor.
Wow.
And whenever he come to Colorado, he comes to the shop.
I
and
love that. I just
for
love that. You guys are such a staple in this community, and you're still here.
I'm always looking for ways to support Black businesses. But the Steigers remind me that it's not just about buying Black. These small businesses are the foundation of their communities, creating the opportunities, role models, and healthy environments that for so much of American history, Black people couldn't find elsewhere. Entrepreneurs in 5 Points like Risa Jones take that responsibility seriously.
Now, tell me a little bit about the name Teeley's. Where exactly does that come from?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother?
And we happened to be drinking out of her teacups and her plate.
Okay, and was her name Teeley?
Her given name was Evelyn Jones.
Okay, and you guys call her Teeley?
She was a wee bitty little thing. So somehow that translated to Teeley.
Gotcha. So what was that deciding factor to be here?
Because our presence was so diminished.
The presence of Black people being in a historically Black neighborhood was so diminished. Okay.
So Welton Street is a historical corridor, cultural historical corridor. Like in most cities where we live, it's redlining, it's segregation. You could perform, you could entertain, it didn't matter how famous you were. You could go downtown to do those performances.
And couldn't stay.
And you couldn't stay. And I'm like, no way, that's where I want to be. I want a place where we, as African-American people, can see ourselves.
Yeah.
So you have a place of comfort, and that's where my grandmother ties in, because I always thought of her house of like, it was good food, good company, good conversation, and wisdom.
Again and again, family is the inspiration for the business owners I've talked to. I wonder, was Risa's family always so entrepreneurial?
And my dad had S&L Properties in Little Rock, Arkansas on 9th Street. He had the Chat and Chew restaurant, a liquor store, and a hotel.
And a hotel?
And a hotel.
Wow.
in the 30s, during the Depression.
And this building was a hotel at one point also,
this
right?
building was a hotel at one point.
The Green Book also listed tourist homes as an option for lodging, which were homes of ordinary citizens who extended their hospitalities to families passing through town. But in 5 Points, the hotels were the district's soul in those days, not only for the necessity, but also for their buzzing atmosphere. The most famous is an architectural landmark, the Rossonian. First built in 1912, the hotel hosted black travelers to Denver and major players from the American jazz scene. Dr. Ronald Stevens has the scoop.
On the main floor, that was the jazz lounge, and then, you know, the hotel on the upper level floors. But what was unique is the number of entertainers, the major names that came through here, which is why Five Points got the nickname the Harlem of the West.
Gotcha.
And many of those entertainers, they either performed outdoors or at some of the hotels downtown where they couldn't stay.
Right.
And in between, they would go back to, you know, the Rossonian, and that's where they would perform. So it was a dynamic spot. It lasted up until roughly around the 1950s, just as, you know, restricted governance was lessening and African Americans were able to move other places.
The legendary Rossonian still stands today as a beacon to those generations of black travelers. In fact, legends can be found all across Denver's Five Points district. And those legends run deep.
You always hear the legend of your family, and I always say legend because you're trying to, okay, where's the fact?
Yeah.
And where's the fiction?
Right. What's actually true, right?
Right. Literally last Friday, my nephew pulls the scrapbook out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this
Family
matches
treasures.
the legend.
I love
Here's the
it.
facts to match.
I love it.
And you know I had to take a peek at Reese's history, which, as Dr. Stevens said, is really American history.
Oh my gosh, and it's your own green book.
It is, truly.
I cannot believe that they have preserved this. This is fantastic.
This book goes
This is the only way we know.
To the 30s, the 40s.
Oh,
so this is my grandfather.
Wow.
Samuel, he was Samuel Franklin Jones Sr. My dad was Samuel Franklin Jones Jr.
I love that your family has so much history in a place like Little Rock that also has so much history in terms of segregation, in terms of civil rights. I mean, the Little Rock Nine, all of that. Oh, this is the Chat and Chew.
So this is inside the Chat and Chew.
Oh my gosh, look how well they were dressed. Woo!
I know. I'm like the hats,
Handsome.
the clothes.
Handsome. Wait a second. CNC Hotel.
Yes.
Jones Liquor Store, which we just saw. The
Right,
Chat and Chew,
Chew.
which we just saw. And the, oh my gosh.
Billiards.
Okay, we have to see if they're in these green books.
Okay, let's take a look.
I hope they are. I'll give you this one.
Do a little research.
I want to look. Okay, CNC Hotel. So I would need to look under Little Rock. And this is the green book from 1954.
And this one, what do I have here? 1940 edition.
Yep.
Established in 36 in the 1940 edition. So let's see if we can find Little Rock. What you finding?
I found CNC. Woohoo! Wait a minute.
CNC.
West 9th Street.
West 9th. All of his properties were on West 9th Street.
Oh my days.
Yes.
Your family
is in the green book.
Is in the green book. Woohoo! And you're in the new green book. My version. Wait. Liquor store, Jones, 528 West 9th Street. This is so, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, that's them.
And then it says, please mention the green book and patronizing these places. This is fantastic.
It is.
Your family literally is part of national history.
Right.
And the proof is right here. And now, Tea Leaves is also part of national history, and you are the proof.
Wow, phenomenal.